The first shot rang out just as Vanessa Fitzgerald threw the pouch of stolen gold onto her saddle, the bullet splintering the wooden post beside her head. Dawn had barely broken over the horizon, painting Taylor, Texas in hues of orange and gold that belied the danger unfolding at the town's edge. "Stop right there, Vanessa," Sheriff Harlan Wade's voice boomed across the distance between them, his badge gleaming in the early morning light. "You're not riding out of here with that gold." Vanessa's heart hammered in her chest as she swung onto her palomino, her long brown hair whipping behind her as she spurred the horse forward. "You're the thief, Harlan," she shouted over her shoulder. "You framed me and I can prove it." The thundering hoofbeats of her horse drowned out whatever the sheriff shouted next as she galloped away from Taylor, the place she'd called home for 23 years. 3 days ago, she had been respected as the daughter of the late town doctor. Now, she was a fugitive with a price on her head for a crime she didn't commit. The year was 1878, and justice in the West often came from the barrel of a gun rather than a courtroom. As Vanessa pushed her horse harder, she knew her only hope lay with the one person who might believe her innocence, the reclusive rancher who lived in the hills beyond Broken Creek, a man known simply as Grant Holloway. The sun climbed higher in the Texas sky as Vanessa rode, each mile putting distance between her and the false accusations that had destroyed her life. The gold she carried wasn't stolen, it was her inheritance, the money her father had left her after his death 3 months prior. Sheriff Wade had accused her of stealing it from the bank, claiming she'd taken advantage of her position as the bank manager's assistant. What Wade didn't know was that Vanessa had seen him meeting with masked men behind the saloon the night before the bank was robbed. She had kept silent, afraid of the power he wielded in Taylor. That had been her first mistake. By noon, the rolling hills gave way to the rugged terrain that surrounded Broken Creek. Vanessa slowed her exhausted horse, patting its lathered neck as she scanned the horizon for any sign of Grant Holloway's ranch. She had met the man only twice, once when he brought supplies into town, and again when he had come to her father for treatment of a bullet wound last winter. He had struck her as honorable, despite the rumors that swirled around him. Some said he was a former Texas Ranger who had walked away after witnessing too much corruption. Others claimed he had been a notorious outlaw who had changed his ways. All Vanessa knew for certain was that Grant Holloway kept to himself and seemed to have little respect for Sheriff Wade. As she crested a hill, Vanessa spotted a modest ranch nestled against the backdrop of her rocky cliff face. Smoke curled from the chimney of the main house, and several horses grazed in a corral nearby. Relief flooded through her, but it was short-lived. The distant sound of hoofbeats alerted her to pursuers. Spurring her tired mount forward, Vanessa raced toward the ranch. She was halfway across the open ground when a rifle shot cracked the air. Her horse reared in panic, nearly throwing her, but she managed to keep her seat and continue forward. "Holloway," she shouted as she approached the ranch house. "Grant Holloway." The door swung open, and a tall figure stepped onto the porch, rifle in hand. Grant Holloway's face was partially obscured by a dark beard, but his green eyes were sharp as they assessed the situation, a woman riding hard toward his home, with what appeared to be pursuers in the distance. "Get inside," he commanded, his voice deep and steady as he raised his rifle to his shoulder. Vanessa didn't need to be told twice. She dismounted, grabbed her saddlebags containing the gold, and hurried toward the house. As she passed Grant, she caught the scent of leather and pine, an oddly comforting smell in the midst of chaos. Inside the ranch house, Vanessa leaned against the wall, catching her breath as Grant remained on the porch, watching the approaching riders. She took in her surroundings, the simple but clean furnishings, a bookshelf filled with volumes that seemed out of place in a ranch house, and a desk covered with maps. Grant stepped back inside, closing the door behind him. "Sheriff Wade and 2 deputies," he said, confirming her fears. "Want to tell me why Taylor's law is chasing you across my property, Miss Fitzgerald?" Surprised that he remembered her name, Vanessa straightened. "He's falsely accused me of stealing from the bank, but the truth is, he's the thief." He orchestrated the robbery and framed me because I saw him meeting with the robbers the night before. Grant's expression remained neutral as he set his rifle aside. That's a serious accusation against a man with a badge. I wouldn't be here if I had anywhere else to turn, Vanessa replied, her voice steady despite her exhaustion. My father always said you were a man of principle. A flicker of something respect perhaps crossed Grant's face. Dr. Fitzgerald was a good man, one of the few in these parts. He moved to the window, peering out at the approaching riders. Wade's not setting foot in my house without a warrant, and even then, I'd be inclined to argue. A heavy knock on the door interrupted them. Grant motioned for Vanessa to move to the back of the room before he opened the door, positioning himself squarely in the entrance. Holloway, Sheriff Wade's voice carried the false pleasantry of a man used to getting his way through intimidation. I see you've got company. What brings you out this way, Sheriff? Grant asked, ignoring the implied question. I'm tracking a thief, Wade replied. Vanessa Fitzgerald stole a considerable sum from the bank in Taylor. She was seen heading this direction. Grant leaned against the doorframe, his posture casual but his eyes vigilant. I haven't seen any thieves today, just a lot of lawmen trespassing on private property. One of the deputies shifted nervously, but Sheriff Wade's face hardened. Step aside, Holloway. We need to search your place. No, Grant's response was simple but firm. You want to search my property, you come back with a warrant. Until then, you're not welcome here. Wade's hand moved to rest on his holstered pistol. You harboring a criminal, Holloway. I'm exercising my rights as a property owner, Grant countered. Now, unless you've got official business that doesn't involve threatening me on my own land, I suggest you ride back to Taylor. The tension stretched between them, a silent battle of wills. Finally, Wade took a step back. This isn't over, Holloway. If I find out you're hiding her, you'll both face the consequences. Good day, Sheriff, Grant replied, closing the door firmly. Vanessa emerged from the shadows, relief and gratitude washing over her. Thank you. Grant turned to her, his expression serious. Don't thank me yet. Wade doesn't give up easily, especially when his own crimes might be exposed. He gestured to the chair at the table. Sit down and tell me everything, from the beginning. Vanessa sank into the offered chair, the weight of the past 3 days settling on her shoulders. It started when my father died. He left me his savings, $500 in gold coins. I kept it in a lockbox at home, planning to use it to start a new life elsewhere. Grant listened intently as she continued, explaining how she had seen Sheriff Wade meeting with strangers behind the saloon. Their faces concealed, but their intentions clear from the whispered conversation she'd overheard about the bank's schedule and security. The next morning, the bank was robbed, $2,000 taken. Wade found my father's gold in my home during the investigation and claimed it was part of the stolen money. Her voice trembled with anger. He knew about my inheritance, everyone did, but he used it to frame me. Why would he target you specifically? Grant asked, his brow furrowed. Vanessa's hands clenched in her lap. Because I refused his advances after my father died. Wade thought with no family left to protect me, I'd be grateful for his protection. When I made it clear I wasn't interested, he became persistent. Grant's jaw tightened at this revelation. Wade's been sheriff for 8 years. In that time, I've watched him grow more corrupt, but this. He shook his head. This is bold even for him. I have no proof beyond my word against his, Vanessa admitted, but I couldn't stay in that jail cell waiting for a trial that would never be fair. How did you escape? Grant asked, genuine curiosity in his voice. A small smile touched Vanessa's lips. Deputy Miller has always been sweet on me. He's young and naive. When I told him I needed to use the privy, he didn't think to check if the window was large enough for me to climb through. Grant's deep chuckle surprised her. Resourceful, the moment of levity faded quickly as reality set in. Vanessa was a fugitive, and Grant was now implicated in her escape by offering her sanctuary. I can't stay here, she said, rising from the chair. I've put you in enough danger already. If you could spare a fresh horse, I'll ride on and what? Grant interrupted. Wade will have telegraphed every town within 100 miles by now. You won't make it far on your own. What choice do I have? Vanessa challenged. Grant studied her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Finally, he said, we gather evidence, prove Wade's involvement in the robbery. Clear your name. We, Vanessa repeated, caught off guard by his willingness to help her. Grant moved to the stove, stoking the fire and setting a pot of coffee to boil. Your father saved my life last winter. I owe him a debt I can never repay. Besides, he added, a hint of a smile touching his lips, I've never much cared for Harlan Wade. As night fell, Grant showed Vanessa to a small bedroom that had once belonged to his younger brother, who had moved east years ago. The room was simple but clean, with a narrow bed and a chest of drawers. For the first time in days, Vanessa allowed herself to truly rest, the exhaustion of her ordeal catching up to her. She awoke to the smell of bacon frying and the sound of movement in the kitchen. Sunlight streamed through the small window, telling her she had slept later than intended. Hastily washing her face in the basin provided, Vanessa made her way to the kitchen. Grant stood at the stove, his back to her as he tended to breakfast. Without his coat and hat, she could see the broad expanse of his shoulders, the way his dark hair curled slightly at the nape of his neck. Good morning, she said, announcing her presence. He turned, nodding in greeting. There's fresh coffee on the table, hope you're hungry. They ate in companionable silence, the simple meal of bacon, eggs, and biscuits better than anything Vanessa could remember eating in recent memory. As Grant poured her a second cup of coffee, he outlined his plan. Wade will be watching the roads, but there's a back trail through the hills that leads to Pearson's Creek. An old friend of mine runs the general store there. He might have information about who Wade's been associating with. Vanessa nodded, grateful for his strategic thinking. When do we leave? Within the hour, Grant replied. Pack light. We'll travel fast and avoid the main roads. As they prepared to depart, Grant handed Vanessa a spare pistol, a well-maintained Colt revolver. You know how to use this. Vanessa took the weapon, checking the cylinder with practiced ease. My father insisted I learn, said a woman alone needed to protect herself. Grant looked impressed. Smart man, your father. They set out just as the sun reached its zenith, riding through rugged terrain that would have been impassable to anyone unfamiliar with the land. Grant led the way, occasionally pointing out landmarks or offering a steadying hand when the path grew treacherous. By late afternoon, they had reached a ridge overlooking a small valley where Pearson's Creek nestled among cottonwood trees. The town was little more than a collection of buildings along a single dirt street, but it represented safety at least temporarily. We'll approach after dark, Grant decided, dismounting to rest the horses. Less chance of being recognized. As they waited for nightfall, sharing jerky and hardtack from Grant's saddlebags, Vanessa found herself studying her unlikely ally. In the fading light, his features seemed less harsh, the lines around his eyes speaking of laughter as much as hardship. How did you come to live alone out here? She asked, curiosity getting the better of her. Grant was silent for so long that Vanessa thought he might not answer. Finally, he said, I rode with the Rangers for 5 years, saw things, did things that changed me. Came back to find my parents had died of fever and the ranch was all that was left. I'm sorry, Vanessa offered, recognizing the shared experience of loss. Grant shrugged, but his eyes betrayed deeper emotions. Your turn. Why did you stay in Taylor after your father died? Surely you had opportunities elsewhere, Vanessa smiled sadly. I had planned to leave. My father always wanted me to study medicine in the East. I was saving for the journey when. She trailed off, the wound of her father's death still fresh. After he died, I couldn't bring myself to leave right away. His grave was still fresh, and I thought I owed it to his memory to stay a while longer. And now, Grant asked quietly. Now I don't know if I'll ever be able to go back, she admitted. Even if we prove Wade's guilt, the scandal might follow me. Darkness fell, bringing with it a chill that had them both reaching for their coats. Grant checked his pocket watch by the fading embers of their small fire. Time to move. They rode into Pearson's Creek, just as the saloon was filling with its nightly patrons. Grant led them to a modest building at the end of the street, a sign declaring it Pearson's General Merchandise. A lamp still burned inside despite the late hour. Tying their horses to the hitching post, Grant knocked a specific pattern on the back door. It opened almost immediately, revealing a man in his 50s with graying hair and spectacles perched on his nose. "Grant Holloway," the man said, his face breaking into a genuine smile. "It's been too long." "Victor," Grant greeted him warmly. "We need to come in, quietly." Victor's eyes moved to Vanessa, assessing her with a shrewd gaze before nodding. "Of course, this way." The back room of the store was cramped but comfortable, with a small stove providing warmth and a table covered in ledgers and papers. Victor gestured for them to sit, pouring 3 glasses of whiskey from a bottle he retrieved from a cupboard. "Victor Pearson, meet Vanessa Fitzgerald," Grant introduced them. "She's in trouble and we need information." Victor's eyebrows rose. "Fitzgerald, Dr. Fitzgerald's daughter from Taylor," Vanessa nodded, surprised. "You knew my father. He saved my nephew's life years ago," Victor explained. "Good man, I was sorry to hear of his passing." He turned to Grant. "What kind of trouble are we talking about?" Grant explained the situation concisely, leaving out no details. Victor listened without interruption, occasionally nodding or frowning as the story unfolded. "Harlan Wade," Victor muttered when Grant finished. "Can't say I'm surprised. Man's had a reputation for years, but no one's been able to pin anything on him." "We need to know who he's working with," Grant pressed. "The men Vanessa saw him meeting with they're the key to proving her innocence." Victor took a long sip of his whiskey, thinking. "There's been talk of a gang operating between here and the Red River. Professional thieves targeting banks and stagecoaches. They hit Millerton about 2 months back. Sheriff, there couldn't identify any of them. They wore masks and were gone before anyone could organize a proper pursuit." "Do you have any names?" Vanessa asked eagerly. Victor shook his head. "No names, but there's a description that might help. One of the men has a distinctive limp. Got shot during a robbery last year and never healed right." Grant's expression sharpened. "I know him. Jonas Pike. Used to ride with the Carter brothers before they were hanged in Fort Worth." "If Pike is involved, the leader is likely Raymond Delaney," Victor added. "They've worked together for years." Vanessa leaned forward, hope kindling in her chest. "How do we find them?" Victor and Grant exchanged glances. "Delaney has a woman in Dry Creek," Victor said cautiously. "Keeps a cabin there where he holes up between jobs." "Dry Creek is less than a day's ride from here," Grant mused. "We could be there by tomorrow evening if we leave at first light." Victor stood, moving to a chest in the corner of the room. "You'll need supplies, and you should rest here tonight. I've got rooms upstairs that I keep for friends who need to stay out of sight." As Victor gathered food and ammunition for their journey, Vanessa caught Grant watching her, concern evident in his green eyes. "This is dangerous," he said quietly. "Delaney and his men won't hesitate to kill us both if they discover why we're looking for them." "I know the risks," Vanessa replied, her voice steady, "but I can't live as a fugitive. I need to clear my name, even if it means facing Delaney." Grant's expression softened, admiration replacing concern. "Your father would be proud of your courage." For the first time since her ordeal began, Vanessa felt a glimmer of hope. With Grant beside her, perhaps justice wasn't as far out of reach as she had feared. Morning came with a soft rain that turned the streets of Pearson's Creek to mud. Vanessa and Grant departed as planned, their horses freshly rested and their saddlebags filled with Victor's generous provisions. The journey to Dry Creek would take them through rough country, but Grant knew the way, having tracked outlaws through the region during his ranger days. As they rode, the rain cleared, giving way to brilliant sunshine that transformed the landscape. Wildflowers dotted the plains, and hawks circled overhead, their shadows racing across the ground below. Despite the danger that awaited them, Vanessa found herself appreciating the beauty around them. "How did you become a Texas Ranger?" she asked Grant as they paused to rest the horses beside a clear stream. "You don't seem like a man who would naturally seek out authority," Grant smiled wryly. "I didn't. After the war, I was restless, angry. My brother urged me to find purpose, and the Rangers were recruiting men who could handle themselves in difficult situations." He bent to splash water on his face. "I was good at tracking, better at shooting. It seemed like a way to do some good. And was it?" Vanessa pressed, curious about the man who had risked so much to help her. Grant's expression darkened. "Sometimes. I caught men who deserved catching, protected people who needed protecting." But I also saw rangers who were no better than the criminals. They hunted men who used their badges as licenses to kill and steal. Is that why you left? Grant nodded slowly. There was a raid on a Mexican village. The captain claimed we were pursuing horse thieves, but when we got there... He trailed off, the memory clearly painful. There were no thieves, just families. Some of the rangers started shooting anyway. I tried to stop it, but by then... Vanessa moved closer, placing her hand on his arm. You can't blame yourself for the actions of others. Maybe not, Grant agreed, his gaze meeting hers. But I can make sure I never stand by while injustice happens again. The intensity in his eyes made her breath catch. That's why I'm helping you, Vanessa, not just because of your father. The moment stretched between them, charged with unspoken emotions. Finally, Grant cleared his throat and stepped back. We should keep moving if we want to reach Dry Creek by nightfall. As they continued their journey, Vanessa found herself watching Grant more closely, noticing the grace with which he moved, the quiet authority he commanded without effort. He was unlike any man she had ever known, principled yet pragmatic, strong yet gentle when the situation called for it. By late afternoon, they approached Dry Creek, a ramshackle settlement that had sprung up around a stagecoach station and now served as a haven for those looking to avoid scrutiny. Grant led them to a stand of trees overlooking the town. Delaney's cabin is on the other side of town, near the creek, he explained, pointing to a distant structure partially hidden by cottonwoods. We'll wait until dark, then approach on foot. Less chance of being spotted that way. As the sun set, casting long shadows across the landscape, Grant outlined his plan. They would pose as a married couple seeking shelter for the night, claiming their wagon had broken down on the road from Pearson's Creek. Once inside the town, they would gather information about Delaney's whereabouts and the identity of the woman he was known to visit. Darkness fell, and they made their way into Dry Creek, leaving their horses tethered in the trees with enough slack to graze. Grant offered Vanessa his arm as they approached the saloon, the only establishment still showing light and activity at this hour. Remember, he murmured as they reached the swinging doors, you're Victoria Holloway, my wife of 2 years. We're heading to Fort Worth to visit your sister. Vanessa nodded, slipping her arm through his and leaning slightly into his side in a gesture that would appear affectionate to observers. The warmth of his body against hers was unexpectedly comforting in the cool night air. The saloon was dimly lit and sparsely populated, a card game in one corner, a few solitary drinkers scattered at tables, and a tired-looking woman serving drinks from behind a scarred wooden bar. Grant led Vanessa to a table near the wall, positioning himself so he could see both the door and the bar. "Whiskey for me," he told the barmaid when she approached, "and tea for my wife, if you have it." The woman nodded, her gaze lingering on Vanessa with mild curiosity. "Tea'll take a few minutes to brew. Just got in. Our wagon lost a wheel about 2 miles back," Grant explained smoothly. "Had to leave it until morning. We're hoping to find a place to stay for the night." The barmaid Maggie, according to the name she provided, suggested the boarding house at the end of the street. "Mrs. Watts keeps clean rooms, charges fair prices too." Grant thanked her, then casually asked, "Quiet town you have here, not many folks around tonight." Maggie shrugged. "Most nights are quiet. Gets lively when the stage comes through or when certain regular visitors show up." She glanced toward the door as if expecting someone. "Speaking of which, if you're staying at Watts's place, you might want to head there soon." Raymond and his friends arrived earlier, and they tend to get rowdy after a few drinks. Vanessa's heart raced at the mention of Raymond. Could it be Delaney? She kept her expression neutral as Grant asked, "Raymond Delaney," Maggie confirmed, lowering her voice. "Comes through every few weeks, stays at Eliza Morgan's place by the creek. Between you and me, they're sweet on each other, though she could do better." Grant nodded, as if merely interested in local gossip. "Well, we'll steer clear. My wife and I prefer quiet evenings." Maggie returned with their drinks, and Grant paid her generously, ensuring her continued goodwill. As she moved away, Vanessa leaned closer to Grant. "If Delaney's already here, he might have information about the bank robbery," she whispered. "We need to find a way to get to Eliza Morgan's house." "First, we need to secure rooms at the boarding house," Grant replied softly. Establish our presence here as legitimate travelers, then I'll do some reconnoitering while you rest. Vanessa frowned. I'm not staying behind while you take all the risks. Grant's eyes met hers, a mix of admiration and concern in their depths. Vanessa, Delaney knows me from my ranger days. If he sees me, our cover is blown, but he doesn't know you. Understanding dawned. You want me to approach Eliza Morgan. It's risky, Grant admitted, but a woman might be more willing to talk to another woman. If you can gain her trust, she might reveal something about Delaney's activities, including whether he was in Taylor around the time of the robbery. They finished their drinks and made their way to the boarding house, where Mrs. Watts, a stern-faced widow with sharp eyes that missed nothing, provided them with a small but clean room containing a single bed. The implication of sharing such close quarters brought a flush to Vanessa's cheeks, but Grant merely thanked the landlady and carried their meager belongings upstairs. Once alone in the room, Grant immediately moved to the window, checking sight lines and possible escape routes. I'll sleep on the floor, he said, answering Vanessa's unspoken question. We should rest now. Tomorrow will require all our wits. Vanessa sat on the edge of the bed, suddenly aware of the intimacy of their situation. In the close confines of the room, she could smell the subtle scent of leather and soap that seemed to cling to Grant, could see the way the lamplight caught the gold flecks in his green eyes. What if this doesn't work? She asked quietly. What if we can't find evidence linking Delaney to Wade? Grant paused in his preparations for sleep, his expression softening as he regarded her. Then we try something else. I'm not giving up on clearing your name, Vanessa. I promise you that. The certainty in his voice reassured her more than any elaborate plan could have. Vanessa realized with startling clarity that she trusted this man completely, despite having known him for such a short time. There was something about Grant Holloway that inspired confidence, a solid dependability that had become increasingly rare in her experience. Thank you, she said simply. Knowing the words were inadequate to express her gratitude, Grant nodded, understanding in his eyes. Get some sleep. Tomorrow begins early. Morning brought a flurry of activity to Dry Creek as merchants opened their shops and travelers prepared to depart. Grant and Vanessa breakfasted in the boarding house dining room, maintaining their cover as a married couple while observing the comings and goings in the street below. Eliza Morgan should be at the general store around midday, Grant murmured over his coffee. Mrs. Watts mentioned she always comes in for supplies on Tuesdays. Vanessa nodded, her nervousness at the coming confrontation tempered by determination. What about Delaney? Will he be with her? Unlikely. According to what I overheard in the hallway this morning, he and his men are planning to ride out by noon. Something about business in Greenville. Grant's expression grew serious. This might be our only chance to speak with Eliza alone. After breakfast, they separated Grant to inquire about repairs for their fictitious wagon, Vanessa to position herself near the general store to await Eliza Morgan's arrival. The plan was simple. Vanessa would strike up a conversation, perhaps offering assistance if the opportunity presented itself, and gradually steer the discussion toward Raymond Delaney. As noon approached, Vanessa waited on the store's porch, her heart pounding with anticipation. She had practiced her story repeatedly in her mind. Victoria Holloway, traveling to Fort Worth, interested in settling in the area and curious about local residents. At 12:30, a slender woman with auburn hair pulled into a practical bun approached the store. She wore a simple blue dress, well-made but not ostentatious, and carried herself with quiet dignity that set her apart from the other women Vanessa had observed in Dry Creek. Taking a deep breath, Vanessa stepped forward as the woman reached the store steps. Excuse me, are you familiar with this establishment? My husband and I are stranded here temporarily, and I need to purchase some essentials. Eliza Morgan for Vanessa was certain this must be her, smiled politely. Yes, Mr. Davis keeps a well-stocked store. Is there something specific you're looking for? Thread for mending, primarily, Vanessa replied, falling into step beside Eliza as they entered the store. Our wagon suffered damage on the road, and I'm afraid my husband's shirt was torn during the repairs. The conversation flowed naturally as they moved through the store, Eliza offering helpful suggestions about which items represented the best value. Vanessa found herself genuinely liking the woman, which made her deception all the more uncomfortable. After making her purchases, Vanessa invited Eliza to share a pot of tea at the small cafe adjacent to the store. To her relief, Eliza accepted, and soon they were seated at a corner table, steam rising from their cups. "Have you lived in Dry Creek long?" Vanessa asked, carefully guiding the conversation toward personal matters. Eliza smiled, a hint of sadness in her eyes. 5 years now. I came west after my husband died, looking for a fresh start. The stagecoach broke down here and somehow I never continued on. I'm sorry about your husband, Vanessa offered sincerely. It was a long time ago, Eliza replied, stirring her tea thoughtfully. And life has a way of bringing unexpected joys even after tragedy. Sensing an opening, Vanessa leaned forward slightly. Have you found happiness here then? It seems like such a quiet place. A faint blush colored Eliza's cheeks. I have friends, and there's someone special, though our circumstances are complicated. Love often is, Vanessa said gently, thinking of her own confusing feelings for Grant that had begun to develop despite the danger surrounding them. Eliza studied Vanessa, seeming to make a decision. His name is Raymond. He can't stay in one place because of his work, but he visits when he can. What kind of work keeps him traveling? Vanessa asked, her heart racing at the confirmation that this was indeed Delaney's woman. Eliza's expression grew guarded. He's in business with several partners, investments primarily. Before Vanessa could pursue this line of questioning further, the cafe door opened with a bang, and 3 men entered. The leader, a tall man with dark hair and a neatly trimmed beard, immediately spotted Eliza and strode toward their table, irritation evident in his movements. Eliza, he said, his voice carrying a note of command despite its quiet tone. I've been looking for you. Raymond Delaney was more imposing in person than Vanessa had imagined, broad-shouldered and handsome in a sharp, dangerous way. His eyes, blue and calculating, flicked to Vanessa with suspicious assessment. Raymond, Eliza said, surprise and something like fear crossing her features. I thought you were leaving for Greenville. Plans changed, he replied curtly. Who's your friend? Vanessa forced herself to smile naturally, though her instincts screamed danger. Victoria Holloway. My husband and I are stranded here until our wagon is repaired. Eliza has been kind enough to show me around. Delaney's gaze remained cool. Holloway, any relation to Grant Holloway? The question sent ice through Vanessa's veins, but she maintained her composure. I don't believe so. My husband's family is from Missouri originally. One of Delaney's companions, a man with a noticeable limp who could only be Jonah's Pike, leaned forward to whisper something in Delaney's ear. The outlaw's expression hardened. Interesting, he said, his tone belying the word's meaning. Because Jonah's here says he saw a man matching Grant Holloway's description at the livery stable this morning. Former Texas Ranger Grant Holloway. Vanessa's mind raced for a plausible explanation, but before she could speak, Delaney continued, his voice deceptively casual. And what's even more interesting is that Pike was in Taylor last week. Saw a poster there for a fugitive named Vanessa Fitzgerald. Dark hair, green eyes looking remarkably like yours, Mrs. Holloway. Eliza looked between them, confusion and betrayal dawning on her face. Raymond, what are you talking about? Vanessa knew the game was up. She reached slowly for her reticule, where Grant had insisted she keep the small derringer he'd given her, but Delaney was faster. His hand shot out, gripping her wrist with bruising force. I wouldn't, he said softly. Pike, check outside for Holloway. Farley, keep watch on the door. His cold gaze fixed on Vanessa. You and I are going to have a little talk, Miss Fitzgerald, about Sheriff Wade and why you're so far from Taylor. Terror coursed through Vanessa, but she refused to show it. I don't know what you're talking about. My name is Victoria Holloway. Delaney's grip tightened. We can do this the easy way or the hard way. Your choice. Raymond, stop it, Eliza exclaimed, rising from her chair. You're hurting her. Delaney's attention shifted momentarily to Eliza, and in that instant, the cafe's front window exploded in a shower of glass, as a rifle shot shattered the silence of Dry Creek. Pike dropped to the floor, clutching his shoulder and cursing loudly. Delaney released Vanessa's wrist, reaching for his pistol as he dragged Eliza in front of him as a shield. Outside, more gunfire erupted and shouts filled the air. "Grant," Vanessa breathed, knowing instinctively who had fired that first shot. Chaos engulfed the cafe as patrons scattered, seeking cover from the gunfight unfolding in the street. Delaney backed toward the kitchen door, still using Eliza as protection. "You tell Holloway if he wants to see either of you alive again, he'll meet me at the old Miller place tonight." Alone and unarmed, Delaney's voice was cold with fury. "Otherwise, I'll send Eliza back to him in pieces, followed by you." With that chilling promise, he dragged Eliza through the kitchen and out the back door, Farley covering their retreat while Pike continued to writhe on the floor, blood seeping through his fingers where he clutched his wounded shoulder. Vanessa seized her chance, diving for cover behind an overturned table as more bullets splintered the doorframe. She needed to reach Grant, to warn him about Delaney's ultimatum and Eliza's kidnapping. Crawling toward the shattered window, Vanessa peered carefully over the sill. Grant was positioned across the street, firing methodically at the remaining members of Delaney's gang who had established positions around the cafe. Two bodies already lay motionless in the dusty street. Vanessa calculated the distance between the cafe and Grant's position. It wasn't far, perhaps 20 yards, but crossing that open ground would expose her to fire from multiple directions. Still, she had no choice. Taking a deep breath, Vanessa removed her cumbersome skirt, leaving her in the practical riding pants she wore underneath a scandal in polite society but a necessity for their journey. The lighter garment would allow her to move more quickly. "Grant," she shouted over the gunfire. "I'm coming out." "Cover me." Without waiting for a response, Vanessa launched herself through the broken window, landing hard on the wooden sidewalk outside. Bullets kicked up dirt around her as she sprinted across the street, her lungs burning with exertion and fear. Grant's strong hand caught her arm, pulling her into the shelter of the stable wall where he had taken position. "Are you hit?" he demanded, his eyes scanning her for injuries even as he fired another shot toward their attackers. "No," Vanessa gasped, struggling to catch her breath. "But Delaney has Eliza. He's using her as a hostage, says if you want us alive, you'll meet him at the Miller place tonight alone and unarmed." Grant's expression darkened. "The Miller place is an abandoned ranch about 3 miles north of here. Delaney's used it before as a hideout." He fired again and another of Delaney's men fell. "He won't be expecting us to follow immediately." "Us?" Vanessa questioned. "Grant, he specifically said you should come alone." Grant reloaded his rifle with practiced efficiency. "And walk straight into an ambush, no. We go together, and we go now, while they're still establishing their position at the Miller Ranch." With the remaining gang members pinned down by a hastily formed posse of townspeople, Grant and Vanessa were able to retrieve their horses and slip away from Dry Creek unnoticed. They rode hard toward the north, following a creek bed that provided cover from anyone watching the main trail. As they rode, Grant outlined his plan. They would approach the Miller Ranch from the west, using the setting sun to obscure their movements. The old barn would provide cover for their horses, and the ranch house itself had a cellar accessible from outside, a potential entry point Delaney might not consider. "Delaney's dangerous," Grant warned as they slowed their pace, the Miller Ranch now visible in the distance. "He was wanted for murder even before I left the Rangers. He won't hesitate to kill Eliza or you if it serves his purpose." Vanessa nodded grimly. "I understand the risk, but we can't abandon Eliza. This is my fault she's in danger because of me." Grant's expression softened momentarily. "Your compassion does you credit, Vanessa. But remember, Delaney is the villain here, not you." They tethered their horses in a stand of trees a quarter-mile from the ranch, continuing on foot with weapons ready. Grant carried his rifle and pistol, while Vanessa had the derringer and a knife Grant had insisted she take from his saddlebags. The Miller Ranch stood in eerie silence as they approached, no smoke from the chimney or lights in the windows to indicate occupation. But Grant pointed to fresh hoofprints in the soft earth near the house Delaney had arrived as expected. Using hand signals, Grant directed Vanessa to follow him around to the back of the property, where a storm cellar door lay partially concealed by overgrown weeds. The padlock that had once secured it hung broken on the hasp. Grant eased the door open, wincing at the slight creak of rusty hinges. He went first, rifle ready as he descended into the darkness. Vanessa followed, each step careful and deliberate to avoid making noise. The cellar was cool and damp, smelling of earth and forgotten preserves. A narrow staircase led up to what Vanessa presumed was the kitchen. Grant paused at the bottom, listening intently before gesturing for Vanessa to stay close behind him. They ascended slowly, freezing in place when a floorboard creaked overhead. Male voices drifted through the thin wooden door at the top of the stairs, Delaney giving orders to his men. "Check the perimeter again. Holloway's a tricky bastard. He won't come in the front door." "What about the woman?" A voice Vanessa didn't recognize. "She's seen our faces. We can't let her go, even if Holloway cooperates." Delaney's response was chilling. "Once Holloway's dead, neither of them will be a problem. Take care of the Fitzgerald woman first. I'll handle Eliza myself." "She shouldn't have betrayed me." Vanessa's heart raced at the casual way Delaney discussed murder. Beside her, Grant's expression hardened into cold determination. He leaned close, his breath warm against her ear as he whispered, "3 men, possibly 4. Eliza's likely in the front room where they can watch the approach to the house." The voices moved away from the kitchen, and Grant seized the opportunity. With exquisite care, he turned the latch on the cellar door and eased it open just enough to peer into the kitchen beyond. Finding it empty, he motioned for Vanessa to follow. They emerged into a dusty kitchen, abandoned dishes still sitting on shelves and an iron stove standing cold in the corner. Grant moved silently to the connecting door that led to the main room of the house, listening again before risking a glance. When he turned back to Vanessa, his expression was grim but determined. "Delaney and 1 man in the front room. Eliza is tied to a chair. The other 2 must be outside watching for my approach." He checked his pistol one last time. "Stay here. When the shooting starts, find cover and don't move until I call for you." Vanessa caught his arm as he prepared to move. "Be careful," she whispered, suddenly terrified this might be the last time she saw him alive. Grant's eyes met hers, something unspoken passing between them. Then, in a movement so swift it caught her by surprise, he leaned forward and pressed his lips to hers, a brief, fierce kiss that sent heat flooding through her body, despite the danger surrounding them. "For luck," he murmured as he pulled away, a hint of a smile touching his lips before he turned serious again. "Remember, stay down until I call." Before Vanessa could respond, Grant was moving, slipping through the door and into the hallway beyond. She pressed herself against the wall, Derringer clutched in her trembling hand as she waited for the inevitable confrontation. The house remained silent for several agonizing minutes. Then a shout from outside shattered the stillness. One of Delaney's lookouts must have spotted something. Gunfire erupted almost immediately, followed by the sound of breaking glass and splintering wood. Unable to remain hidden while Grant faced such danger, Vanessa crept to the kitchen door and peered into the hall. The front room was a scene of chaos, furniture overturned for cover, glass from shattered windows strewn across the floor, and Raymond Delaney himself crouched behind an overturned table, firing toward the front door where one of his men lay motionless in a spreading pool of blood. Eliza was still tied to the chair, now toppled onto its side, her face pale with fear as bullets flew around her. Vanessa couldn't see Grant from her position, but the methodical return fire told her he was still fighting. A movement to her left caught Vanessa's attention. The fourth gang member was creeping along the side of the house, positioning himself to flank Grant's position. Without hesitation, Vanessa raised her Derringer and fired, the small gun's report nearly lost in the larger battle. Her aim was true. The outlaw stumbled, clutching his leg where her bullet had found its mark. He turned toward her, rage contorting his features as he raised his own weapon, but before he could fire, another shot rang out, and he collapsed face first onto the dusty floor. Grant stood in the doorway, connecting the kitchen to a side porch, his smoking pistol still trained on the fallen man. His eyes met Vanessa's, a mixture of exasperation and admiration in their depths. "I told you to stay down," he said, though there was no real anger in his voice. "You're welcome," Vanessa replied, her momentary bravado fading as the reality of what she'd done shot a man sank in. Their brief exchange was interrupted by a shout from the front room. "Holloway, I know you're there." Delaney's voice carried the edge of desperation. "I've still got the woman." "Throw out your weapons or she dies right now." Grant moved cautiously to the hallway entrance, keeping his body shielded by the wall. "It's over, Delaney. Your men are dead or wounded. Surrender now and you might live to see trial." Delaney's laugh was harsh. "Trial. We both know that's not how this ends, Ranger." The contemptuous emphasis he placed on Grant's former title spoke volumes. "But I'm not dying alone. Either you drop your weapons and step out where I can see you, or I put a bullet in Eliza's pretty head." Vanessa could see the conflict in Grant's eyes, the tactical assessment of a trained lawman warring with the moral imperative to protect an innocent life. She knew what he would choose even before he began to lower his rifle. "Don't do it," she whispered urgently. "He'll kill you both." Grant's expression was resolute. "I can't let him murder Eliza, but I need you to be ready. When I move into the open, Delaney will focus on me. That's your chance to free Eliza if you can reach her." Before Vanessa could argue further, Grant called out, "I'm coming out, Delaney." "Don't harm the woman." Slowly, deliberately, Grant placed his rifle on the floor and stepped into the hallway, his empty hands raised to shoulder height. Vanessa pressed herself against the wall, watching with her heart in her throat as he moved toward the front room. "That's far enough," Delaney commanded when Grant reached the doorway. "Kick your pistol over here." Grant complied, sending his revolver skittering across the wooden floor toward Delaney. From her position, Vanessa could now see into the front room. Delaney stood behind the overturned chair where Eliza lay bound, his pistol pressed to her temple. "Now the knife in your boot," Delaney demanded, his eyes never leaving Grant's face. As Grant bent to remove the hidden weapon, Vanessa saw her opportunity. The kitchen connected to the front room through a second door, partially hidden by a large cabinet. If she could circle around while Delaney was focused on Grant, she might be able to reach Eliza, or at least provide a distraction. Moving silently, Vanessa slipped through the kitchen to the secondary entrance, easing the door open just enough to peer into the front room from a new angle. Delaney's back was partially turned to her now, his attention fixed on Grant, who stood exposed and vulnerable in the main doorway. "You know," Delaney was saying, an unpleasant smile twisting his features, "I've been looking forward to this for a long time. You cost me a lot of money and 2 good men when you broke up our operation in Lerdo." "That was business," Grant replied calmly, his posture relaxed despite the danger. "This is personal. You're working with Sheriff Wade to frame an innocent woman." Delaney's expression registered brief surprise. "Wade, that pompous fool, he approached us with the bank job, said it would be easy money, never mentioned anything about framing anyone." This revelation confirmed Vanessa's suspicions, but there was no time to dwell on it. While Delaney was talking, she had managed to ease herself into the room, keeping low behind the scattered furniture. She was now less than 10 feet from where Eliza lay bound. "Let Eliza go," Grant continued, deliberately keeping Delaney's focus. "She has nothing to do with this." Delaney laughed. "She has everything to do with this now. She's my ticket out of here." His expression hardened. "But you won't be so lucky, Holloway. Neither will your lady friend once my men find her." "Your men are dead," Grant stated flatly. "It's just you now, Delaney. Put down the gun and maybe you'll see another sunrise." Fury contorted Delaney's features. "You're lying." He snarled, momentarily lifting the pistol from Eliza's head to point it at Grant. In that instant, several things happened at once. Grant dove to the side as Delaney fired, the bullet splintering the doorframe where Grant had been standing. Vanessa lunged forward, driving her shoulder into Delaney's legs and sending him stumbling backward. And Eliza, seizing the moment despite her bonds, rolled away from her captor with desperate strength. Delaney recovered quickly, rage transforming his handsome features into something monstrous as he turned his weapon toward Vanessa. But before he could fire, Grant was on him, tackling him to the ground with enough force to send the pistol flying from his grasp. The two men grappled fiercely, each fighting with the knowledge that defeat meant death. Delaney was younger, but Grant fought with the skill and determination of a man defending not just his own life, but the lives of those he had sworn to protect. Vanessa scrambled to Eliza's side, using the knife Grant had given her to cut through the ropes binding the woman's hands and feet. "Can you walk?" she asked urgently. Eliza nodded, her face pale but her eyes clear. "Get his gun," she urged, pointing to where Delaney's pistol had fallen near the overturned table. Vanessa moved toward the weapon, but before she could reach it, Delaney broke free of Grant's hold and lunged for the gun himself. Grant caught him by the ankle, dragging him back, and the fight resumed with renewed ferocity. A sharp crack echoed through the room as Delaney's fist connected with Grant's jaw, momentarily stunning him. The outlaw used the advantage to scramble toward his pistol once more, fingers closing around the grip as he swung it toward Grant. "No," Vanessa cried, throwing herself forward in desperate intervention. The gun discharged, the sound deafening in the confined space. For one terrible moment, Vanessa thought Grant had been hit. But it was Delaney who looked surprised, his eyes widening as he stared down at the spreading crimson stain on his chest. Behind him stood Eliza, Grant's fallen pistol clutched in her shaking hands, smoke still curling from the barrel. "You wouldn't," Delaney gasped, incomprehension in his fading gaze as he collapsed to his knees. "You loved me." "I loved who I thought you were," Eliza replied, her voice steady despite the tears streaming down her face. "Not what you became." Delaney toppled forward, his final breath escaping in a long, rattling sigh. The pistol slipped from Eliza's grasp, clattering to the floor as she sank to her knees, shock and grief overwhelming her now that the immediate danger had passed. Grant moved to Vanessa's side, his hands gentle as they examined her for injuries. "Are you hurt?" he asked, concern evident in his voice. Vanessa shook her head, too overcome for words as the reality of their narrow escape washed over her. Grant's arms encircled her, pulling her against his chest where she could hear the reassuring beat of his heart. "It's over," he murmured into her hair. "You're safe now." But Vanessa knew it wasn't truly over, not while Sheriff Wade remained free in Taylor, his crimes unpunished. As if reading her thoughts, Grant added, "Delaney confirmed Wade's involvement. With his testimony, we could have cleared your name." "We still can," Eliza said quietly, composing herself with visible effort. "I heard everything. Raymond told me about the bank job in Taylor, how the sheriff approached them with the plan. I can testify to what I know." Hope bloomed in Vanessa's chest. With Eliza's testimony and the evidence they had gathered, perhaps justice was possible after all. She looked up at Grant, finding strength in his steady gaze. "Then it's time we return to Taylor," she said, determination replacing fear. "It's time Sheriff Wade faced justice for his crimes." The journey back to Taylor took 3 days, hampered by the need to avoid main roads where Wade might have posted lookouts. Eliza traveled with them, her knowledge of Delaney's operations proving invaluable as they pieced together the full extent of Wade's corruption. According to Eliza, Wade had been working with Delaney's gang for at least a year, providing information about vulnerable banks and stagecoaches in exchange for a share of the profits. The Taylor Bank robbery had been his idea, a way to replenish county coffers he had already emptied through embezzlement. Raymond said Wade specifically wanted you framed, Eliza told Vanessa as they made camp on the second night. "Said you were asking too many questions about county expenditures." Vanessa nodded slowly, remembering the ledgers she had been reviewing in her role as the bank manager's assistant. "I noticed discrepancies in the county accounts, money allocated for road repairs and the new schoolhouse that never seemed to be spent on those projects." "Wade must have realized you were close to exposing him," Grant concluded, adding another log to their small fire. "Framing you for theft would discredit any accusations you might make." The realization that her integrity had threatened Wade enough to warrant such elaborate framing both chilled and strengthened Vanessa. She had been right to question the accounts, right to trust her instincts about the sheriff's corruption. As they neared Taylor on the third day, Grant outlined his plan. They would not ride directly into town where Wade controlled the law. Instead, they would seek out Judge Emmett Collins, whose circuit included Taylor and who was known for his uncompromising stance on corruption. Collins has a ranch about 5 miles south of town, Grant explained. If we can present our evidence to him, he has the authority to suspend Wade and order his arrest. The judge's ranch was exactly as Grant had described, a well-maintained property with a main house built of sturdy limestone and several outbuildings for staff and equipment. As they approached, a ranch hand intercepted them, rifle ready until Grant identified himself. Holloway, the ex-ranger. The man lowered his weapon slightly. Judge isn't expecting visitors. Tell him it concerns Sheriff Wade of Taylor and evidence of corruption and criminal conspiracy, Grant replied. He'll want to hear what we have to say. The ranch hand hesitated, then nodded, directing them to wait by the corral while he delivered the message. 15 minutes later, they were ushered into the judge's study, a book-lined room that spoke of its owner's education and refinement. Judge Collins was older than Vanessa had expected, his hair and beard completely white, but his eyes were sharp as they assessed the 3 travel-worn visitors. "Grant Holloway," he said, recognition in his voice. "It's been some years. I heard you left the Rangers." "Yes, sir," Grant replied respectfully. "This is Miss Vanessa Fitzgerald of Taylor and Mrs. Eliza Morgan of Dry Creek." The judge's eyebrows rose at Vanessa's name. "Miss Fitzgerald, Sheriff Wade has circulars out for your arrest, claims you stole from the Taylor Bank." "Those claims are false, Your Honor," Vanessa stated firmly. "We have evidence that Sheriff Wade himself orchestrated the bank robbery and framed me to cover his own embezzlement of county funds." Judge Collins leaned back in his chair, his expression neutral but attentive. "That's a serious allegation against an elected official. I'll need more than just your word." For the next hour, they presented their case: Vanessa's observations of the county accounts, her sighting of Wade with the masked men before the robbery, Eliza's testimony about Delaney's partnership with the sheriff, and Grant's account of the confrontation in Dry Creek, where Delaney had confirmed Wade's involvement. The judge listened without interruption, occasionally making notes on the paper before him. When they finished, he sat in silence for several moments, fingers steepled beneath his chin. "Ordinarily," he said at last, "I would want more concrete evidence, written records, additional witnesses, perhaps a confession from one of these outlaws you confronted." Vanessa's heart sank, but the judge continued, "However, I've had my concerns about Harlan Wade for some time. Complaints about excessive fees, suspicious patterns in criminal prosecutions, and rumors about missing evidence in certain cases." He straightened in his chair, decision made. "I believe there's enough here to justify further investigation. I'll issue a writ suspending Wade from his duties pending a full inquiry." Relief washed over Vanessa, though she knew this was only the beginning. "What about the charges against me? I can't defend myself if I'm in jail." "I'll issue a stay on your arrest warrant," Judge Collins assured her. "But understand, Miss Fitzgerald, clearing your name completely will require proving Wade's guilt beyond reasonable doubt." "We understand, Your Honor," Grant replied before Vanessa could speak. "How do you want to proceed?" The judge's plan was straightforward but risky. He would ride into Taylor the following morning with a small contingent of trusted men, including the county marshal who outranked Wade. They would present the suspension order at the sheriff's office and begin a formal investigation into the county finances and the bank robbery. "You 3 should remain here until we've secured the situation," Judge Collins advised. "If Wade realizes you're nearby, he might attempt to flee or worse." Though Vanessa chafed at the delay, she recognized the wisdom in the judge's caution. They accepted his offer of hospitality, grateful for proper beds and hot meals after days on the trail. That evening, Vanessa found herself alone with Grant on the judge's back porch, watching the sunset paint the Texas sky in brilliant shades of gold and crimson. The events of the past week had left little time for personal reflection, but now, in this moment of relative peace, the emotions she had been suppressing rose to the surface. "What happens after this is over?" she asked quietly. assuming we succeed in proving Wade's guilt. Grant leaned against the porch railing, his profile strong against the fading light. That depends on what you want, Vanessa. Your name will be cleared. You could stay in Taylor, rebuild your life there. I'm not sure I want to stay, she admitted. Even before all this, I had plans to leave to study medicine as my father wanted. Grant nodded slowly. That seems fitting. You have a healer's instincts, compassionate but practical. A smile touched his lips. You'll make a fine doctor someday. The conversation lapsed into comfortable silence, but Vanessa felt unspoken questions hanging between them. The kiss they had shared in the Miller Ranch kitchen had not been mentioned since, yet she thought of it often, the unexpected tenderness in the midst of danger, the way it had awakened feelings she had never experienced before. "And what about you?" she asked finally. "Will you return to your ranch after this?" Grant turned to face her, his expression thoughtful. "I've been thinking about that. My ranch is isolated, peaceful. It's been a good place to heal from the past." He paused, seeming to search for the right words. "But these past days, despite the danger or perhaps because of it, I've felt more alive than I have in years." Vanessa's heart quickened at the intensity in his gaze. "Because of the excitement?" she asked, though she suspected his answer would be different. "Because of you," Grant said simply. "You remind me that there are still things worth fighting for, Vanessa. Justice, truth." He took a step closer. Love, the word hung between them, charged with meaning. Vanessa felt her breath catch as Grant reached out, his hand gently cupping her cheek. "I know it's too soon," he continued, his voice low. "We've known each other under extraordinary circumstances, but I can't deny what I feel for you." Vanessa covered his hand with her own, drawing strength from his touch. "It isn't too soon," she whispered. "Some things don't need time to be true." Grant's smile was radiant as he drew her into his arms, his lips finding hers in a kiss that held promise rather than desperation. Vanessa melted into his embrace, her doubts fading as she recognized the rightness of this connection between them. When they finally parted, Grant rested his forehead against hers. "Whatever you decide, Taylor, medical school, anywhere at all, I want to be part of that future if you'll have me." Vanessa smiled, happiness blooming within her despite the challenges still ahead. "I think I'd like that very much," Grant Holloway. The next morning brought tension and anticipation as they waited for news from Taylor. Judge Collins and his party had departed at dawn, and with each passing hour, Vanessa's anxiety grew. What if Wade resisted arrest? What if he had already destroyed evidence of his crimes? Grant seemed outwardly calm, but Vanessa noticed the way he checked and rechecked his pistol, the manner in which his gaze constantly scanned the horizon. He was preparing for trouble, should it come their way. Midday passed with no word. Eliza attempted to distract them with conversation about her plans to sell her property in Dry Creek and start fresh elsewhere, perhaps in California where her sister lived. Vanessa listened politely, but her thoughts remained fixed on the confrontation unfolding in Taylor. It was nearly sunset when the sound of approaching horses drew them outside. Judge Collins rode at the head of the group, his expression grim as he dismounted. Behind him, another rider led a horse bearing a slumped figure, a man with his hands bound, head bowed in defeat. Sheriff Harlan Wade had not come quietly. He tried to run, Judge Collins explained as they gathered in his study. Had a bag packed and was heading for the stables when we arrived. When confronted, he drew his weapon. The judge's eyes moved to Grant. No one was seriously hurt, but Wade took a bullet in the shoulder before he surrendered. Vanessa felt no sympathy for the man who had caused her so much suffering. "Did you find evidence of his crimes?" "More than expected," the judge confirmed. "Deputy Miller showed us where Wade kept his private ledger. It details every transaction with Delaney's gang, including the Taylor Bank robbery. And there was more. Wade has been extorting protection money from businesses for years, skimming from tax collections, selling confiscated property for personal profit." Relief and vindication washed over Vanessa. "Then it's over. My name is cleared," Judge Collins nodded. "The charges against you have been dropped, Miss Fitzgerald. In fact, the bank manager asked me to convey his apologies and inform you that your position remains open, should you wish to return." The offer was generous, but Vanessa had already decided her future lay elsewhere. "Please thank him for me, but I have other plans." "Before we discuss those plans," Grant interjected, "there's something I'd like to know." He turned to the judge. "What happens to Wade now?" "He'll be transferred to the state prison in Huntsville to await trial," Judge Collins replied. "Given the evidence against him and the number of charges, he's likely to spend the rest of his life behind bars." Justice had been served, though Vanessa took little pleasure in another's downfall. What mattered was that the truth had prevailed, her father's good name preserved along with her own. As if sensing her thoughts, Grant moved to her side, his hand finding hers in a gesture of support and affection. "What would you like to do now?" he asked quietly. Vanessa looked up at him, her decision already made. "I still want to study medicine to honor my father's wish. But perhaps that journey can wait a little while." Her fingers tightened around his. "I think I'd like to see your ranch first to help rebuild what we left behind so hastily." Grant's smile was all the answer she needed. Whatever path they chose, they would walk it together. The following day, they prepared to depart, Vanessa and Grant for his ranch beyond Broken Creek, Eliza for Fort Worth, where she would arrange passage to California. Judge Collins provided fresh horses and supplies, refusing any payment with the explanation that justice served was reward enough. As they said their goodbyes, Eliza embraced Vanessa warmly. "I can never thank you enough for what you did," she said, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "You risked your life for a stranger." "Not a stranger," Vanessa corrected gently. "A friend." Eliza smiled, pressing something into Vanessa's hand, a small cameo brooch she had worn throughout their ordeal. "To remember me by, and to remind you that sometimes the most difficult journeys lead us exactly where we need to be." With final farewells exchanged, they set out, Eliza toward her new beginning in the West, Vanessa and Grant toward the hills where his ranch awaited them. The morning was clear, the air crisp with the promise of autumn, and the road stretched before them like an invitation. They rode side by side, comfortable in each other's company, occasionally exchanging glances that spoke more eloquently than words. When they stopped to rest the horses beside a clear stream, Grant pulled Vanessa into his arms, his kiss tender yet passionate. "I've been thinking," he said when they finally parted, "about what you said regarding medical school." Vanessa raised an eyebrow, curious about his thoughts. "Oh, the nearest medical college that accepts women is in Philadelphia," Grant continued, his expression thoughtful. "It's a long way from Texas, but I hear the land in Pennsylvania is good for raising horses." Joy bubbled up within Vanessa as she realized what he was suggesting. "Grant Holloway, are you proposing to follow me across the country?" His smile was both sheepish and determined. "I'm proposing whatever it takes to build a life with you, Vanessa Fitzgerald, whether that's in Texas, Pennsylvania, or the moon." Impulsively, Vanessa threw her arms around his neck, nearly knocking him off balance with the force of her embrace. "Yes," she whispered against his ear. "Yes to all of it," Grant laughed, lifting her off her feet in an exuberant circle before setting her down gently. "Then I suppose we have plans to make, Dr. Fitzgerald to be." They reached Grant's ranch as the sun was setting, the familiar silhouette of the main house and outbuildings a welcome sight after their long journey. Despite the layer of dust that had accumulated in Grant's absence, the ranch felt immediately like home to Vanessa, perhaps because of the man beside her, perhaps because of the promise it represented. That evening, as they sat on the porch watching stars appear one by one in the darkening sky, Vanessa felt a sense of peace she had not experienced since before her father's death. The path ahead would not be easy. Medical school would demand her full commitment, and establishing a new life in an unfamiliar city would bring its own challenges, but with Grant beside her, she faced the future with confidence rather than fear. "I've been thinking about something Wade said during his arrest," Grant remarked, breaking the comfortable silence. "According to Judge Collins, when they showed him the evidence against him, Wade kept insisting you deserved justice, not chains. It was the closest thing to remorse he displayed." Vanessa considered this unexpected information. Perhaps there was a shred of conscience left in him after all. Or perhaps, Grant suggested, taking her hand in his, Even a man as corrupt as Wade could recognize true innocence when confronted with it. Vanessa smiled at his generous interpretation. Either way, it's fitting that his own words acknowledged the truth in the end. Grant nodded, his thumb tracing gentle circles on the back of her hand. Justice prevailed, not through the system perhaps, but through courage and determination. His gaze, warm in the lantern light, rested on her face. "Your courage, Vanessa, our courage," she corrected, leaning into his solid warmth. "I couldn't have done any of this without you, Grant." He pressed a kiss to her temple, and they lapsed back into comfortable silence, content to simply be together as the night deepened around them. Tomorrow would bring decisions and plans, preparations for the journey ahead. But tonight belonged to them alone, a moment of perfect understanding between two souls who had found each other against all odds. 1 year later, Vanessa stood on the platform of the Philadelphia train station, her medical school acceptance letter clutched in one hand, her other hand resting contentedly in Grant's. The journey from Texas had been long but uneventful, a stark contrast to their first adventure together. Grant had sold his ranch, using the proceeds to purchase a modest property outside Philadelphia where he could raise horses while Vanessa pursued her studies. It was a compromise that suited them both close enough to the city for her education, rural enough to satisfy his preference for open spaces. As they stepped off the platform into their new life, Vanessa thought about the extraordinary chain of events that had led her here. A false accusation, a desperate escape, an unlikely alliance that had blossomed into profound love. What had begun in injustice had transformed into opportunity, proving that even the darkest circumstances could lead to light. "Ready?" Grant asked, his smile reflecting her own excitement and anticipation. Vanessa nodded, squeezing his hand. "Ready for anything as long as we're together." And together they walked into their future, two souls united by justice, bound by love, and dedicated to building a life worthy of the second chance they had been given.